2, 3. All right, welcome to our presentation on dyslexia and literacy, the innovative use of e-learning modules to enhance teacher development, expertise, and advocacy. So who we are, I'm Kai Greene from Dominguez Hills, and we have Dominic Grasso from CSUN from Northridge, and Sue Sears from CSUN as well, sharing this presentation with you today. And we come from a collaborative, the UC CSU Collaborative, where we have a multiple network of different campuses and different stakeholders with different expertise, with the ultimate goal of improving educational outcomes for all students. So here's a group of us for the Dyslexia Literacy Task Force as of May 2025. And the overview of the collaborative, we received state funding in 2019 to focus on dyslexia and literacy. Funding has been extended to focus on neurodiversity and other whole child and policy approaches to learning. And really the goal is to share this platform for teacher preparation programs as well as practitioners and families based on neuroscience, diversity, and learning. So why we matter? Well, we believe as the collaborative experience that all students have value and promise. And I think it's important to really understand the diversity in learning across the state of California. We have approximately 13% of K through 12 students identified with a disability. Reported 1 in 5 students experience difficulty with learning or attention across a range of different disabilities. And most recently, we see and hear a lot more about social emotional well-being and learning. And we have a report of about 80% of students have expressed more challenges, right, with anxiety, with depression and trauma, which can have a real impact on learning. So here we have an outline of 6 modules that are up and running, the electronic learning modules. We have Introduction to Dyslexia and Literacy, the Reading Brain and Dyslexia. We have another module on screening and assessment, also one on early childhood and dyslexia, one on multilingual English language learners, and then another module on expanded foundational literacy skills. And these are modules that are available to you. We'll share that access to you at the end of the presentation. We also have 2 modules in development looking at written expression among school-age children, as well as focus on literacy and dyslexia in secondary students. For the presentation today, we're just going to highlight the focus on teacher education, the expertise that we bring to teacher education, how we advocate for our students, and innovative learning modules to share in your classrooms or with your colleagues. And we're going to focus on these 3 modules specifically: the multilingual English learner module, the screening and assessment module, and also the expanded foundational literacy module. All right, so one of the questions we bring up with the multilingual English learner module is really the cultural biases and gaps that exist in assessment, how this has been an ongoing issue. And then again, the challenges that become with a diagnosis, with identification of English learners, multilingual students with a disability, as well as instructional services. I'm going to highlight the multilingual English learner module that we have one activity here in particular that's applied practice that deals with assessment issues among multilingual learners. And we really focus, right, on equity in assessment for multilingual populations. So we know of a very long documented history of a bias in assessments and misidentification of students who speak other languages than English or other dialects as well. It's really important, and it's expressed in this module, to develop a deep understanding of language terms, linguistic terms, educational language policy and practice. And again, this module addresses issues of linguicism, discrimination based on language or dialect, as well as accentism, discrimination based on the way one speaks, writes, and communicates. So for this module, we have an assessment plan checklist, and this is a nice activity introduced to students to really walk through the steps stage by stage using evidence-based practices when there are concerns related to language and or reading skills. So this is a checklist that walks the participant of the module through a step-by-step process, along with some really excellent resources that cross language and linguistic domains among many, many languages. What we really want to emphasize as well, of course, is the rich diversity, the linguistic diversity among school-age populations in California. This is just a breakdown of over the 100 languages represented in California, with the top 10 listed in the pie chart. And also we address the terms applied in school districts for multilingual learners, with English learners, English language development, multilingual learners, and that might vary among different school districts. Just to keep an example for you is an eye on the city of Los Angeles, being the second largest city in the country. Los Angeles is divided into over 80 districts or neighborhoods with almost 4 million inhabitants who come from over 140 different countries and speak more than 224 different identified languages or dialects. So ultimately, in this module, we really want to bring up to you this notion of this old paradigm of a difference versus a disorder when we're considering assessment or language learning issues among English learners or multilingual speakers. And in this module, you'll find more information about understanding how language or dialectical differences are really products of typical sociolinguistic processes, and developmental language disorders, specific learning disabilities, or dyslexia. Those are products of deficient or impaired psycholinguistic processes.
Okay, great, thanks.
Oh, I was going to say, now Dominic.
So as we jump into our next section, on the next module we'll be covering, which is the module on screening for literacy, screening and assessment for literacy and dyslexia. We wanted to give you a little bit of background as to the timeliness of this module because of some of the new legislation that will be rolling out or has rolled out for the 2025-2026 school year. So starting in 2025-2026 school year, universal screening will be required for all of our K-2 students in California. This was signed into effect last year, but the screening will actually start taking place this year during the 2025-2026 school year. What the actual bill or budget summary says is that all kindergarten through second grade students will be screened for risk of reading difficulties, increasing early identification and support. And we wanted to give you a little bit more information on what the actual mandate states and what are some of the requirements for schools and districts and LEAs. So like we already mentioned, starting in 2025-2026, once a year, all K through 2 students need to be screened for reading difficulties. LEAs or school districts will accomplish that by choosing a screening instrument adopted by their school board or governing board from an approved list of screeners that are available. Currently, there are 4 available, and we'll cover those in a minute. Important to note that and Kai was just discussing multilingual learners, but it's important to note what you see on the bottom here, that the LEAs are responsible for making sure the language of the screener reflects the primary language of the pupils in their district or classroom. The purpose of this screener, it's to be considered part of a school's comprehensive instructional strategy. It's really to inform instruction and identify learning needs. It's to inform families and teachers of different different needs of different students, as well as to close some academic achievement gaps. The results, so the purpose of this legislation is to make sure that the results are really used for effective classroom instruction, targeted intervention as needed, and to allow kind of as a gateway for further diagnosis if the concerns don't resolve after effective instruction and targeted tiered intervention. The screening results shall be used as a flag for a potential risk for reading difficulties, not as a diagnosis of a disability. So that's a really important distinction to make, that this is just, the purpose of this is to flag for potential risk for reading difficulties. The purpose of this is not to diagnose with a reading disability such as dyslexia. So I mentioned there were 4 approved screeners that districts and LEAs can choose from. This list was published in December of 2024, and there are 4 options available. Amira, which is available in grades K through 2 in English and Spanish. M-Class with Dibble's 8th edition and M-Class Lectura, which is available for grades K through 2 English and Spanish. Multitudes, which is also available for grades K through 2 English and Spanish. And then the Rapid Online Assessment of Reading, or ROAR, which is available for grades 1 and 2 in English only. And I know that many of these screening companies and organizations are working to provide additional language options as well, in addition to what you see on the screen here. So now that we've covered some of the new legislation to kind of highlight why this module is so important, I'll take you through a little bit of what you'll actually find in this module covering screening and assessment of literacy skills and dyslexia. So this module is fairly large. It covers a pretty good amount of items, from an overview of assessment, MTSS, the importance of screening. It will provide some examples of some different screeners, the process for screening and assessing a child for special education services, and the module also covers resources for families to help families support their children, as well as access different services that they might need. Throughout this module, we make a really strong point to provide strategies for identifying, as well as challenging educational systems that have maintained some inequities. So concepts like over-identification are addressed heavily throughout this module. Here are the objectives for the module. As I mentioned, it is kind of a larger module, so it does cover a lot, but we do think it's really comprehensive and will be especially helpful as we navigate the new legislation, which we just discussed. Section 1 covers an introduction to assessment. So what you see here on this slide and what you'll see on the next few slides is I'm not going to actually take you through what is in Section 1, but we wanted to give you an image of the kinds of things that you might encounter in the module, so you can kind of see that it's not just text, it's interactive scenarios, it's flip cards, it's interactive checks for comprehension and things like that. So we'll kind of highlight those as we go through. But Section 1 covers an introduction to assessment. Section 2 covers screening for dyslexia. Section 3 covers using assessments to guide instruction. Section 4 covers assessment for support services. And Section 5 covers different family considerations. So it's a pretty comprehensive module that covers a lot of different things, all of which are very relevant to help support you in navigating the new legislation we already discussed. And now I will turn it over to our colleague, Sue Sears,
Thank you, Dominic. As comprehensive as the assessment and screening module is, the expanded foundational literacy skills may even exceed that. As you can see here, the table of contents includes 9 sections. We call it expanded because typically foundational skills includes those in the English language arts core standards. And by those, we think of concepts of print, we think of phonological, phonemic awareness, we think of phonics, word recognition, decoding, and fluency. But in this particular module, we expand that to include the contributions of all linguistic processes to word recognition, fluency, and skilled reading. So as in this table of contents, you can see we include those that we typically think of the building blocks of literacy, those foundational skills. But we also include sections on semantic knowledge and vocabulary, morphological knowledge, and syntactic knowledge. And we urge users throughout the module to make connections among all of these different contributors to fluency and skilled reading. We do so in part because once thought to be the result of core phonological processing deficits, recent research suggests that students with and at risk of dyslexia are better understood as truly a heterogeneous group with multiple manifestations and varying student profiles. So while some students do exhibit phonological processing difficulties, many others struggle with additional and or different linguistic processes that underlie skilled reading. And so to address the diversity of struggling readers, including those with dyslexia, we suggest it's important to go beyond sort of traditional views of foundational skills. As Maury Clay says, early in literacy learning, children must discover something about the arbitrary conventions we have for putting the language we speak into printed form. Probably one of the most difficult challenges we as reading individuals experience in our life is that very first understanding of the alphabetic principle, that in fact, in written language systems like English, the letters, the graphemes represent the sounds of the language. So the first section in this module addresses the alphabetic principle and concepts of print. And the second, phonological phonemic awareness, and the sounds and how the sounds do in fact can be somewhat discrete, although not completely discrete, and that they are represented by the letters of the alphabet. And that these, too, are the prerequisites then for decoding and skilled reading. We next then go to semantic knowledge and argue that knowing a word means much, much more than knowing its pronunciation, in other words, how to decode it, and its spelling, how to encode it. But in fact, knowing a word means knowing how it's put together, its orthographic structure, how it functions within sentences in spoken and written language, and also its oftentimes multiple meanings. Morphological knowledge, equally important and becoming much more, I think, important in instruction as we come to realize that English is a morphophological system, writing system, that our writing system represents not only the sounds, the phonemic important part, but also the meanings of words as morphemes convey meaning. And so for this reason, morphological knowledge contributes to word recognition in addition to phonological knowledge and the development of semantic and syntactic knowledge. And then finally, there's a section on syntax. And it is syntax that allows language to make infinite use of finite means. And so I'll explain this image here by saying that you start with a noun phrase like the male elephant seals. You add to that a verb phrase such as swam very purposefully. And then you add a clause. The male elephant seals swam very purposefully toward the beach, and then an independent clause, while the female seals noted their approach with indifference. In each of the sections, we include what can be examples of assessment, and in this particular case, there's a semantic map and a morphological matrix.
Mhm.
We then return to sort of some of those typical what are considered foundational skills, and sometimes almost too exclusively to phonics, decoding, and word recognition. And I think that's the next slide, Dominic. There we go. In this particular section, we talk about Aries developmental phases. We talk about orthographic mapping. We provide a very, I think, exhaustive list of informal assessments in terms of decoding, as well as formal assessments. We talk about structured and explicit phonics instruction, and we talk about the text that children should be reading. And then the next section of foundational skills focuses on fluency. And we all know that fluency is important in supporting reading comprehension, because if you're focusing so much on decoding the words, it's very difficult. You don't have the cognitive resources or memory resources to really think about what is being said, why it's being said, how it's being said, and what it all means. So we take this notion about fluency, that it's not a matter of speed. It is a matter of being able to utilize all the special knowledge a child has about a word. Its letters, its letter patterns, its meaning, its grammatical functions and endings fast enough to have the time to think and comprehend. So everything about a word contributes to how fast it can be read and understood. All of the sections that hit upon these foundational skills include information about assessment of that foundational skill, instruction of that foundational skill, and language differences. And in there, we include dialectical variations as well as considerations for multilingual English learners. And we reference then back, when we talk about assessment, to the screening and assessment module that Dominic was discussing. And when we talk about language variations, we reference back to the multilingual module that Kai was discussing. Again, the idea here is to connect both within a module as well as across modules. In the final section, we talk about structured literacy, and we talk about multi-component approaches to intervention, which our effectiveness resides in the fact that they address the diverse needs of students. All the sections then end with readings, resources, and references, with the idea that as you use the module, these will direct you to other resources that you can use for yourself or for your students. All three of these modules and all of the modules that we've been working on over the last few years have been guided and informed by at least many documents, certainly the most current research, but two pieces of state legislation, one which was the development of the California Dyslexia Guidelines, and the second, Dominic mentioned how legislation has made screening and assessment more timely. These new standards, the new literacy standards, have made our work more timely, and I think amplified its importance. So what we've tried to do is to link the modules then and the content within the modules to the California Dyslexia Guidelines and to the literacy standards. And you can see how we've done that then in the next slide. This is the linking of the module. The name of the module, of course, is on the first horizontal row. The chapters in the Dyslexia Guidelines are on the second. And this is how Introduction to Dyslexia and Literacy, for example, addresses issues and content within multiple chapters within the California Dyslexia Guidelines. And then you can see how each of the modules does so as well. And the next slide, we've linked these modules, and this is all the modules that Kai presented at the very beginning, which are a series, language, literacy, and dyslexia. And this is how those modules, each of those modules that we've talked about, we mentioned, and the three that we've talked about in more detail today, link to the teaching performance expectations. The modules can be found on AREA, which is a hub of resources developed by the UC CSU Collaborative. You can link in to that using the QR code, and you'll see the very bottom row down there are the dyslexia modules that we talked about today, but there are many, many other resources on this website that I think you will find really helpful and useful. So we encourage you to poke around in it. If you have questions, you can email us. So Kai, Dominic, or myself, thank you for viewing the module, and we hope to viewing this particular session around these modules, and we hope to hear from you. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all. Oh, hold on, Kai. You think you have to hit stop record?
Oh gosh, okay.